The gunshot that shattered the morning silence missed Frank Navarro by inches, and in that moment, he realized dying alone on his failing ranch was becoming less a fear and more a certainty. He dove behind the water trough, his heart hammering against his ribs as another bullet splintered the wood of his barn. The dispute with the cattle rustlers had been simmering for months, ever since they had decided his isolated property in the New Mexico territory made an easy target. It was 1878, and law was still a suggestion more than a rule this far from Santa Fe. Frank fired back twice, watching the riders scatter into the scrubland. He knew they would return. They always did. At 32 years old, he had built this ranch with his own hands over the past 8 years, nursing it from nothing into something almost respectable. 300 acres of decent grazing land, a sturdy house, a barn that did not leak too badly, and more loneliness than any man should have to carry. The riders disappeared into the heat shimmer on the horizon, and Frank slowly stood, dusting off his pants. His hands shook slightly, though whether from fear or exhaustion he could not say. He had not slept properly in weeks. The ranch work was endless, and doing it alone was grinding him down to nothing. His last hired hand had left 2 months ago, spooked by the rustler trouble and tired of Frank's silent, brooding presence. Frank walked back to the house, his boots heavy on the packed earth. The isolation had not bothered him at first. After the war, after watching his brother die at Shiloh, after coming home to find his parents had succumbed to fever, silence had seemed like mercy. But silence had a way of growing teeth over the years, of gnawing at a man until he forgot how to be human. He needed help. That was the plain truth of it. The ranch was too much for one man, and the rustlers were getting bolder. But good help was hard to find, and harder to keep when the work was backbreaking, and the company was a grim-faced rancher who barely remembered how to smile. Frank rode into the town of Hawthorne, New Mexico territory, 3 days later, after another sleepless night spent watching for riders who never came. Hawthorne was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a scattering of other buildings that served various purposes. The population hovered around 200 souls, not counting the ranch families in the surrounding area and the nearby Apache encampments. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside, nodding to Martha Wells, the proprietor's wife. She was a kindly woman in her 50s who knew everyone's business and most of their secrets. "Frank Navarro," she said warmly, though her eyes held concern. "Heard you had trouble out your way." "Nothing I cannot handle," Frank said, which was only partially a lie. "I am looking to hire some help. Ranch hand cook, someone who can work hard and not mind the isolation." "You know anyone?" Martha pursed her lips, thinking. "Most of the able men around here are already working. Times are hard, Frank. Everyone is holding tight to what they have." She paused, her expression shifting to something more thoughtful. "Though there might be someone, not what you are expecting, but she is a hard worker." "She, Zinnia Jackson." "Well, Jackson is the name the missionary school gave her. I do not know her birth name." "She is Mescalero Apache, maybe 23, 24 years old. Her family was killed in a raid 3 years back. The wrong place at the wrong time, caught between the army and a war party that was not even from her band. She survived and has been doing odd jobs around town since then. Washing, mending, cleaning. Never complains, never causes trouble. Hardly says a word, actually." Frank considered this. A woman would be a complication, but he was not in a position to be particular. "She know anything about ranch work?" "I would imagine she knows more about surviving on this land than most of us ever will," Martha said. "Her people have been doing it for generations. She is strong, Frank, and she needs the work. The town has been charitable, but charity has limits. Frank found Zinnia Jackson behind the church, hanging laundry on a line strung between two cottonwood trees. She was smaller than he had expected, maybe 5 feet and a few inches, but there was a wiriness to her frame that spoke of strength. Her hair was long and black, hanging in a single braid down her back. She wore a simple calico dress that had been mended multiple times, and her feet were clad in worn moccasins. She looked up as he approached, her dark eyes meeting his without fear or friendliness, just a calm assessment. Her face was angular, with high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. There was a scar on her left cheek, a thin white line that suggested violence in her past. "You are Zinnia Jackson?" Frank asked, removing his hat out of courtesy. She nodded once, her hand stilling on the wet shirt she was hanging. "My name is Frank Navarro. I run a ranch about 10 miles east of here. I need help. Cooking, cleaning, some ranch work if you are able. Room and board plus $30 a month. It is isolated, and there has been some trouble with rustlers, but I will not let harm come to you if I can help it." Zinnia studied him for a long moment. Her expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or simply the weighing of options when there were precious few to weigh. "I will come," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear, with an accent that suggested English was not her first language, though she spoke it well enough. "You do not want to think about it?" Frank asked, surprised by her quick agreement. "There is nothing to think about," Zinnia said simply. "I need work. You offer work. I will do the job." They agreed she would start in 3 days, giving her time to settle her few affairs in town. Frank rode back to his ranch, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. He had not lived with another person in years, had not had a real conversation in longer than he cared to remember. The prospect of a woman on his ranch, even one as quiet as Zinnia promised to be, felt like a stone in his boot, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. He spent the next 3 days preparing. He cleaned the small room off the kitchen that had once been intended for a housekeeper or perhaps children, though neither had ever materialized. He fixed the door so it latched properly and found some old curtains his mother had made, musty but still serviceable. He felt awkward doing it, like he was play-acting at being civilized. Zinnia arrived on the 3rd day, walking the 10 miles from town with a small bundle of possessions tied in a blanket. Frank had meant to pick her up with the wagon, but she had apparently decided not to wait. By the time he saw her coming up the road, she was already within 100 yards of the house. "You should have waited," Frank said, walking out to meet her. "I would have come for you." Zinnia shrugged, her face showing no sign of fatigue despite the long walk in the heat. "I have legs. The distance is not far." She looked around at the ranch with those same assessing eyes, taking in the house, the barn, the corral with its 4 horses, the chicken coop, the well. Frank tried to see it through her eyes and found it wanting. Everything was functional but worn, maintained but not loved. "I will show you where you will stay," Frank said. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest for belongings, and a washstand. Zinnia set her bundle down and turned to face him. "What do you want me to do first?" she asked. Frank blinked. Most people would want to rest, to settle in, but Zinnia looked ready to start immediately. "You can take today to get acquainted with the place. Tomorrow is soon enough to start." "I will start now," Zinnia said. "Show me the kitchen." Over the next few days, Frank discovered that Martha Wells had not exaggerated. Zinnia was a tireless worker. She rose before dawn and rarely stopped moving until after dark. She took over the cooking, which was a mercy because Frank's meals had devolved into jerky and hardtack more often than not. She cleaned the house with a thoroughness that was almost aggressive, scrubbing away years of bachelor grime. She mended his clothes, tended the chickens, hauled water from the well without complaint, and in her spare moments studied the ranch with those quiet, thoughtful eyes. But she rarely spoke. Frank would ask her questions, simple things like how she wanted supplies organized or whether she preferred to do laundry on a particular day, and she would answer with the fewest words possible. She never volunteered information, never made small talk, never smiled. At meals, they sat in silence, eating efficiently before returning to their separate tasks. Frank told himself he preferred it this way. He had hired her for work, not conversation, but the silence between them felt different from the solitude he had known before. It was weighted, full of things unspoken, and it made him uncomfortably aware of his own isolation. 2 weeks after Zinnia arrived, the rustlers came back. It was just after sunset, that violet hour when the heat finally began to break. Frank was in the barn, tending to a horse with a stone bruise when he heard the thunder of hooves. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside, his heart in his throat. There were 5 of them this time, more than before. They had torches, and as Frank watched in horror, one of them hurled fire at the chicken coop. "No!" Frank shouted, raising his rifle. He fired, missed, fired again. One of the riders jerked in his saddle but did not fall. They scattered, whooping and hollering, circling the ranch like wolves around wounded prey. Frank ran toward the coop, desperate to save it before the fire spread. But before he could reach it, Zinnia appeared from nowhere with a bucket of water. She threw it at the flames with practiced efficiency, then ran back toward the well. Her face was grim but calm, no panic in her movements. "Get inside the house!" Frank yelled at her, but she ignored him, hauling up another bucket with speed born of necessity. The rustlers made another pass, and Frank fired at them, driving them back. They were playing with him, he realized. They wanted him scared, wanted him to make a mistake. One of them fired back, and the bullet kicked up dirt near Frank's feet. Zinnia doused the flames again. The coop was damaged but not destroyed, the chickens squawking in terror but alive. She set the bucket down and, to Frank's astonishment, picked up a large rock. When the riders circled back, she hurled it with shocking accuracy, striking one of the horses in the shoulder. The animal screamed and reared, throwing its rider. The rustlers seemed surprised by this. Their leader, a man with a scarred face and a tobacco-stained beard, yanked his horse to a stop and stared at Zinnia. "You got yourself a squaw, Navarro," he called out, his tone mocking. "That is what you have been doing out here all alone, playing house with an Apache. Leave," Frank said, his voice flat and hard. "Leave now, or the next shot goes through your skull, not over it." The leader laughed, but there was something uncertain in it. His unhorsed companion was scrambling to his feet, cursing. After a moment, the leader spat in the dirt and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over, Navarro," he shouted. "We will be back, and next time we will burn more than your chicken coop." They rode off into the gathering darkness, and Frank slowly lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking again, harder this time. He turned to Zinnia, anger and fear warring in his chest. "Why did you not get inside?" he demanded. "You could have been killed." Zinnia looked at him with those calm, dark eyes. "So could you. The fire needed to be stopped. I stopped it. I cannot protect you if you do not listen to me." Something flickered across her face then, something that might have been anger or pain or both. "I do not need you to protect me, Frank Navarro. I need you to pay me for work. I am doing the work." She turned and walked back to the house, leaving Frank standing alone in the dark, feeling foolish and angry and something else he could not name. He repaired the chicken coop the next day, and Zinnia worked beside him without being asked. She held boards in place while he hammered, handed him nails before he could ask for them, and worked with an efficiency that spoke of experience. Frank found himself sneaking glances at her, wondering about her life before, about what she had endured. "You are good at this," he said, trying to bridge the silence that had grown even heavier since last night's argument. Zinnia shrugged. "I have built many things. With your family." Her hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed their work. "Yes." Frank wanted to ask more, to understand the woman who had come to work for him, but something in her posture warned him off. Grief was a language he understood, and Zinnia spoke it fluently in her silence. The days developed a rhythm. Frank would wake before dawn and find Zinnia already in the kitchen, starting breakfast. They would eat together in silence, then split up for the day's work. Frank tended the cattle and horses, mended fences, patrolled the borders of his property. Zinnia managed the house, the garden she had started near the well, the chickens, the mending, the cooking. In the evenings they would eat together again, then retreat to their separate spaces. But slowly, in small increments, things began to change. Frank started talking more at meals, not expecting responses but simply filling the silence with observations about the ranch, the weather, the cattle. Zinnia listened, her face impassive, but he sensed she was paying attention. One evening, about a month after she had arrived, Frank mentioned that his brother had died in the war. He had not meant to say it, but the words slipped out while he was talking about needing to replace a saddle that had belonged to his father. "My brother used to ride with that saddle," Frank said, running his hand over the worn leather. "Thomas. He was younger than me by 3 years. He died at Shiloh in Tennessee, seems like a lifetime ago now." Zinnia looked up from her plate. "You miss him?" It was not a question, but Frank answered anyway. "Every day," Zinnia nodded slowly. "I had 2 sisters and a brother. I miss them every day too." It was the most personal thing she had said since arriving, and Frank felt the weight of it, the trust it represented. He wanted to ask what had happened, to hear her story, but he sensed that would be pushing too hard. "I am sorry," he said instead. "So am I," Zinnia replied. Something shifted between them that night, some small barrier coming down. Zinnia still did not talk much, but her silence felt less like a wall and more like a comfortable quiet. She started sitting on the porch in the evenings after the work was done, and Frank would join her, both of them watching the sun set over the scrubland. They did not talk much during those times, but the silences were different now, companionable rather than isolating. Frank found himself noticing things about her. The way she hummed sometimes while she worked, wordless melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. The way she was gentle with the horses, running her hands over their necks and speaking to them in her own language, words Frank did not understand, but that the animals seemed to respond to. The way her face would soften when she watched the hawks circling overhead, as if she envied their freedom. He noticed, too, that she was beautiful, though he tried not to think about it. Her features were striking, all sharp angles and smooth copper skin. Her hair caught the light like crow feathers. Her movements were graceful, economical, nothing wasted. But more than that, there was something about her strength, her quiet competence, that drew him in ways he had not expected. It was wrong to think of her that way, Frank told himself. She worked for him, depended on him for her livelihood. The power imbalance made any attraction inappropriate, dangerous even. Besides, what could he possibly offer her? He was a taciturn rancher with a failing property and enemies circling like vultures. She deserved better than his broken pieces. But knowing that did not stop his heart from lifting when he saw her in the mornings, did not stop him from finding excuses to work near her during the day, did not stop him from treasuring those evening silences on the porch when the world shrank down to just the 2 of them and the darkening sky. Summer deepened into its full heat. The work was relentless, but with Zinnia's help, Frank felt like he was finally keeping his head above water. The garden she had planted was thriving, providing fresh vegetables for their meals. The house was cleaner than it had been in years. Even the horses seemed healthier, responding to Zinnia's gentle care. The rustlers had not returned since the night they burned the chicken coop, but Frank knew better than to relax. He kept his rifle close and slept lightly, always listening for the sound of hooves in the night. One afternoon in late July, Frank was mending a fence on the eastern boundary of his property when he saw riders approaching. His hand went automatically to his gun, but he relaxed slightly when he recognized the man in front. It was Samuel Martinez, who owned the ranch 5 miles to the south. "Frank," Samuel called out, raising his hand in greeting. He was in his 50s, a solid man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Behind him rode his son, Miguel, and 2 of his ranch hands. "Samuel," Frank said, walking over to meet them. "What brings you out here?" Samuel dismounted, his expression serious. "We have been having trouble with rustlers, lost 15 head last week. Word is they hit your place too." "They tried," Frank said. "I drove them off, but they will be back." Samuel nodded grimly. "That is what I figured. I have been talking to the other ranchers. We are thinking of banding together, taking the fight to them. There is an old line shack up in the hills where we think they might be holing up. We want to ride up there, see what we can find." Frank considered this. He wanted to help, wanted to end the threat once and for all. But he did not like the idea of leaving Zinnia alone at the ranch. "When are you planning to go?" he asked. "Day after tomorrow. We will leave at first light, be back by nightfall." Samuel paused, studying Frank's face. "I heard you hired a woman to help out. Apache, right?" "Her name is Zinnia," Frank said, a touch of defensiveness in his voice. "And yes, she is Mescalero Apache. She has been a good worker." Samuel held up his hands. "No judgment from me, Frank. I am just saying, if you are worried about her safety while you are gone, she can stay at my ranch. My wife Rosa would welcome the company." Frank wanted to refuse, wanted to say that Zinnia would be fine, but he knew that was his pride talking. If the rustlers came while he was gone, she would be defenseless. "I will ask her," Frank said. "Thank you for the offer." That evening, Frank explained the situation to Zinnia. She listened without interrupting, her face expressionless. "So you would like me to stay with the Martinez family while you are gone," she said when he finished. "I would feel better knowing you were safe," Frank said. "If the rustlers came here while I was gone, you would be alone." Zinnia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have been alone before. I survived." "I know you are capable," Frank said, trying to choose his words carefully. "But why take the risk if there is an alternative?" Zinnia was silent for a long moment, staring out at the darkening land. "The Martinez family, they will be kind to me. Rosa Martinez is a good woman. She will treat you well." Zinnia nodded slowly. "Then I will go. But Frank Navarro, you should be careful too. You are not good to me dead." There was something in her tone, a hint of concern or perhaps affection that made Frank's chest tighten. "I will be careful," he promised. The next day, Frank rode with Zinnia to the Martinez ranch. Rosa Martinez was indeed welcoming, ushering Zinnia inside with warm enthusiasm. She was a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s who talked enough for 3 people, which seemed to both overwhelm and amuse Zinnia. "Do not worry, Frank," Rosa said, patting his arm. "We will take good care of her. You just focus on staying alive out there." Frank left feeling uneasy, though he could not pinpoint why. He told himself it was just worry about the coming confrontation, but part of him knew it was more than that. In the 2 months since Zinnia had arrived, she had become part of the fabric of his life. The ranch felt empty without her presence. The ride to the line shack took most of the morning. There were 8 of them in total, ranchers and their hands, all armed and grim-faced. They found the shack nestled in a canyon, and sure enough, there were signs of recent habitation. But the rustlers were gone, cleared out within the last day or two. "They must have gotten word we were coming," Samuel said, kicking at the cold ashes of a fire. "Damn it." They searched the area but found nothing useful. Frustrated, the group started back. They were about halfway home when they ran into trouble. The rustlers had not run far. They had set up an ambush in a narrow pass, and suddenly the air was full of gunfire. Frank threw himself from his horse, taking cover behind a boulder. All around him, men were shouting, shooting, scrambling for safety. The fight was short but brutal. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the rustlers were dead and the rest had fled. On Frank's side, Miguel Martinez was wounded, a bullet through his shoulder, and one of the ranch hands had been grazed across the ribs. They bandaged the wounds as best they could and limped back home, the triumph of victory soured by blood and pain. It was dark by the time Frank made it back to the Martinez ranch. Rosa took one look at him, dusty and exhausted and splattered with blood that was not his own, and immediately started fussing. "You are hurt. Are you injured? Come inside, let me look at you." "I am fine," Frank said. "It is not my blood. How is Miguel? He will survive. The bullet went clean through. He is young and strong." Rosa's voice was steady, but Frank could see the fear in her eyes, the relief that her son was alive. Zinnia appeared in the doorway behind Rosa. Her eyes swept over Frank, taking in the blood and the dust, and something flickered in her expression. Worry, maybe, or relief. "You are not hurt?" she asked. "No," Frank said. "I am fine." Zinnia nodded, but she did not look convinced. "You should clean up. You look like death." Rosa showed Frank to a wash basin, and he scrubbed away the worst of the grime. When he emerged, Zinnia was waiting with a plate of food. They sat together on the Martinez's porch while Frank ate, neither of them speaking. But Zinnia stayed close, closer than usual, and Frank found comfort in her presence. "I worried about you," Zinnia said quietly, so quietly Frank almost missed it. He looked at her in surprise. Her face was turned away, staring out at the darkness, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "I am sorry for that," Frank said, "but it is over now. The rustlers are scattered, some are dead, the rest will move on to easier targets." "You cannot know that." "No," Frank admitted, "but I believe it." Zinnia turned to look at him then, and in the lamplight from inside the house, her eyes were dark and deep. "I do not want you to die, Frank Navarro. You are the first person in 3 years who has treated me like a person and not a ghost." The words hit Frank hard, revealing depths of loneliness he had only guessed at. He wanted to reach out to touch her hand, to offer some gesture of comfort, but he hesitated, unsure if it would be welcome. "You are not a ghost," he said instead. "You are the most alive person I know." Zinnia's lips curved in something that might have been the start of a smile, though it faded quickly. "We should go home tomorrow." "Yes," Frank agreed, "we should go home." The word home felt different when he said it, warmer somehow, and he realized it was because home now meant a place where Zinnia was. They rode back to the ranch the next morning. Frank had borrowed a horse for Zinnia, and they traveled in comfortable silence, the landscape unfolding around them in shades of gold and brown under the fierce New Mexico sun. When the ranch buildings came into view, Frank felt a sense of rightness settle into his chest. This was home, flawed and struggling but his, and now shared with someone who made it feel less like exile and more like possibility. The weeks that followed were peaceful. The rustlers did not return. The ranch work continued its endless cycle, but with Zinnia's help, it felt manageable instead of overwhelming. Frank found himself laughing sometimes, small chuckles at things Zinnia said or did, sounds he barely remembered how to make. Zinnia, too, seemed to soften. She smiled occasionally, quick fleeting expressions that lit up her whole face. She talked more, sharing small stories about her childhood, about learning to track deer with her father, about her mother's skill with weaving. Frank shared his own stories in return. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about the restlessness that had driven him west after the war, about the dream of building something that was entirely his own. He told her about his fears that he was not good enough, strong enough, to make the ranch succeed. "You are good enough," Zinnia said firmly. "I see how hard you work. The land knows, the animals know. You are good enough." Her faith in him was a gift Frank had not known he needed. One evening in late August, Frank was sitting on the porch as usual, watching the stars come out. Zinnia was inside, cleaning up after supper. He heard her moving around, the soft sounds of domesticity that had become so familiar, so comforting. Then he heard something else. Singing. It was quiet at first, barely audible through the open door. But as Frank listened, it grew slightly louder, more confident. Zinnia was singing in her own language, words Frank did not understand, but that carried emotion in every syllable. The melody was haunting, rising and falling like wind through canyons, like the cry of a hawk, like grief and hope intertwined. Frank stood and moved quietly to the doorway. Zinnia was standing at the wash basin, her hands in the soapy water, her head tilted back slightly as she sang. Her eyes were closed, and her face held an expression of such profound sadness and beauty that Frank felt his throat tighten. He did not know what the song was about. He did not need to. He could feel it in his bones, the weight of loss, the ache of memory, the stubborn persistence of hope in the face of everything that tried to crush it. It was a song about survival, about holding on to your soul when the world tried to strip it away, about being human in the face of inhumanity. Tears started streaming down Frank's face before he realized he was crying. He had not cried since the war, had locked that part of himself away so deeply he thought it was dead. But Zinnia's song reached into that locked place and wrenched it open, and all the grief he had been carrying for years came pouring out. He turned away, not wanting her to see, but it was too late. The song stopped abruptly, and he heard her footsteps behind him. "Frank." Her voice was soft, concerned. He tried to wipe his face to compose himself, but the tears kept coming. "I am sorry," he managed to say. "Your song, it was so beautiful I just could not help myself." There was a long silence. Then Frank felt Zinnia's hand on his shoulder, tentative but warm. "My mother taught me that song," Zinnia said quietly. "It is about the long walk home, not a journey of distance but of spirit, about finding your way back to yourself after you have been lost." Frank turned to face her, no longer trying to hide his tears. Zinnia's eyes were bright with unshed tears of her own. "I have been lost for a long time," Frank said, his voice breaking. "Since the war, since my family died, I have just been going through the motions. But since you came here, I feel like I am finding my way back." "You make me feel human again, Zinnia. You make me feel alive." Zinnia's hand moved from his shoulder to his face, her fingers brushing away his tears with surprising gentleness. "You do the same for me," she whispered. "I thought I would be a ghost forever, but you see me. You see me, Frank Navarro." They stood there in the doorway, the evening air cooling around them, both of them trembling with emotion and something deeper, something neither of them dared name yet. "I do not want you to just work for me anymore," Frank said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I want you to be here because you want to be, because this is your home too, because I cannot imagine this place without you." "I do want to be here," Zinnia said. "But Frank, I need to know. What are you asking me?" Frank took a deep breath, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you. I do not know when it happened, maybe that first day, maybe gradually over all these weeks, but I know it now as surely as I know my own name. I love you, Zinnia Jackson. I love your strength and your silence and your songs and the way you see the world. I love how you make me want to be better. I love you, and if you do not feel the same, I understand, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know. Zinnia's eyes widened, and for a moment, Frank feared he had made a terrible mistake. Then her face softened into an expression of such tenderness that it took his breath away. I love you too, she said simply. I have been fighting it because I was afraid. Afraid to hope for something good after so much loss. Afraid that you would see me as less than because of who I am. But I cannot fight it anymore. I love you, Frank Navarro. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you have never treated me as anything but equal. I love you, and I want to be here not as your worker but as your partner, as your wife if you will have me. Frank let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. If I will have you, Zinnia, you are everything I never dared hope for. Yes, yes, I will have you. I want nothing more than to be your husband. They came together then, holding each other tightly, both of them shaking with relief and joy and the overwhelming force of love finally acknowledged. Frank buried his face in Zinnia's hair, breathing in her scent of soap and sage, and something indefinably her. Zinnia pressed her face against his chest, her arms wrapped around him like she would never let go. They stood like that for a long time, the stars wheeling overhead, the desert night settling in around them. When they finally pulled apart enough to look at each other, Frank cupped Zinnia's face in his hands. I want to do this right, he said. I want to marry you properly, with witnesses and vows and everything. I want everyone to know that you are my wife and that I am proud to be your husband. Zinnia smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. I would like that. They planned the wedding for 2 weeks later, giving them time to make arrangements. Frank rode into Hawthorne and spoke to the minister, Reverend Thompson, a thin, scholarly man who had always treated the local Apache with more respect than most. The Reverend agreed immediately to perform the ceremony. Frank also bought Zinnia a ring, a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone, spending money he could not really afford but not caring. When he presented it to her, Zinnia stared at it for a long moment, her eyes shining. It is beautiful, she said, but Frank, you did not need to spend so much. I wanted to, Frank said. You deserve beautiful things, Zinnia. You deserve everything good this world has to offer. They invited the Martinez family and a few other neighbors who had been kind to them. Martha Wells from the general store insisted on providing a cake. Rosa Martinez offered to help Zinnia make a dress, though Zinnia politely declined, saying she wanted to wear something traditional, a dress her mother had made that she had kept all these years. The day of the wedding dawned clear and hot. Frank put on his best clothes, a suit he had not worn since before the war, and nervously combed his hair. His hands were shaking as he hitched up the wagon to take them into town. Zinnia emerged from her room wearing the dress, and Frank's breath caught. It was buckskin, pale and soft, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of blue and red and white. Her hair hung loose down her back, adorned with small feathers. She looked like something out of a dream, beautiful and strong and entirely herself. You look perfect, Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. Zinnia smiled. So do you. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They stood in the small church, with their handful of guests watching, and exchanged vows. Frank promised to love and honor Zinnia, to stand beside her through whatever came, to cherish her for all his days. Zinnia promised the same, her voice clear and steady, her eyes never leaving his face. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Frank kissed Zinnia gently, mindful of their audience but unable to completely contain the passion he felt. Zinnia kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his cheek, and in that moment, Frank felt like the luckiest man alive. They celebrated with cake and lemonade, with handshakes and well wishes from the small community that had come to witness their union. Not everyone approved, Frank knew that. He had seen the disapproving looks from some of the townspeople, heard the whispered comments about him marrying a savage. But he did not care. Those people did not matter. What mattered was Zinnia, his wife, standing beside him with quiet dignity, meeting every look with calm equanimity. Samuel Martinez clapped Frank on the shoulder. "You are a lucky man, Frank. Take care of her." "I will," Frank promised. "With everything I have." Rosa hugged Zinnia tightly. "You are family now," she said warmly. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you come to us." Zinnia nodded, clearly moved. "Thank you. That means everything." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Frank drove the wagon with one hand, his other hand clasped tightly with Zinnia's. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence was full of anticipation and happiness. When they arrived home, Frank helped Zinnia down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "Carrying you over the threshold," Frank said. "It is tradition." "Whose tradition?" "Mine," Frank said, grinning, and carried her inside. He set her down gently in the main room of the house, their house now, truly shared. Zinnia looked up at him, her eyes dark and deep in the lamplight. "I am nervous," she admitted quietly. "So am I," Frank said. "But Zinnia, we do not have to do anything you are not ready for. We have all the time in the world." Zinnia reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I am ready. I want this. I want you. I am just nervous because I want it to be good for both of us." "It will be," Frank said softly, "because we love each other. That is all that matters." He kissed her then, slowly and deeply, pouring all his love and desire and tenderness into it. Zinnia responded with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing close to his. They stumbled toward the bedroom, kissing and touching, learning the feel of each other without barriers. That night, they came together as husband and wife, with tenderness and passion, with laughter and whispered words of love. It was awkward at times, as first times often are, but it was also beautiful and right and perfect in its imperfection. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, both of them sated and happy, Frank pressed a kiss to Zinnia's forehead. "I love you," he murmured. "I love you too," Zinnia replied, her voice drowsy and content. "I am glad I found you, Frank Navarro." "I am glad you found me too." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Frank's dreams were peaceful. Married life suited them. The daily rhythms of the ranch remained largely the same, but everything felt different now, infused with joy and partnership. They worked side by side during the day, Frank teaching Zinnia more about the cattle and horses, Zinnia teaching Frank about the plants that grew wild on the property, which ones were good for food or medicine. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, Zinnia sometimes singing those haunting songs while Frank listened with closed eyes, letting the music wash over him. Their love deepened as autumn came on, the fierce heat of summer giving way to cooler nights. They grew more comfortable with each other, learning each other's habits and preferences, learning how to navigate disagreements with respect and compromise. Frank had never been happier, and he could see the same happiness reflected in Zinnia's eyes, in the way she smiled more readily now, in the way she laughed at his terrible jokes. In October, Zinnia came to Frank with news that made his heart soar. She was pregnant, carrying their child. Frank whooped with joy and spun her around, then set her down carefully, suddenly worried he had been too rough. I am not made of glass, Zinnia said, amused. The baby is fine. Still, Frank said, placing a hand gently on her still flat stomach. I want to be careful. You are carrying the most precious thing in the world. We are going to be parents, Zinnia said, wonder in her voice. I am going to be a mother. And you will be a wonderful mother, Frank said firmly. Our child will be so lucky to have you, to have us, Zinnia corrected. You will be a wonderful father, Frank. I know it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Zinnia remained active, continuing to work on the ranch though Frank fussed over her and tried to make her rest more. The baby was due in late May or early June of 1879, and as the months passed, Frank found himself consumed with preparations. He built a cradle, working late into the night to sand the wood until it was smooth as silk. He repaired and reinforced everything in the house that might pose a danger to a curious child. He saved every penny he could, wanting to ensure they had enough money for the doctor and any emergencies. Zinnia sewed baby clothes and blankets, her stitches neat and careful. She sang to the baby, her hands resting on her growing belly, and Frank would sit beside her, adding his own voice in a terrible rumbling bass that made Zinnia laugh. Our poor child, she teased, with your singing voice. The baby loves my voice, Frank protested. Look, it is moving. And sure enough, they could see the ripple of movement under Zinnia's dress, the baby responding to its parents' presence. Winter gave way to spring, and Zinnia grew large and uncomfortable but remained in good spirits. Frank was terrified, though he tried to hide it. He had heard too many stories of women dying in childbirth, of babies born still and silent. The thought of losing Zinnia or the child was a constant terror that haunted his dreams. But Zinnia was calm, confident in her body's ability to do what women had been doing since the beginning of time. I am strong, she told Frank when he voiced his fears. I come from a long line of strong women. I will be fine, and so will the baby. Promise me, Frank said, gripping her hands tightly. I cannot promise what I cannot control, Zinnia said gently. But I can promise that I will fight with everything I have to stay with you. I have too much to live for to give up easily. It had to be enough. In late May, the pain started. Zinnia woke Frank in the middle of the night, her face calm but strained. It is time, she said simply. Frank leaped out of bed, his heart racing. He had prepared for this, had the list of things to do, but in the moment his mind went blank. Zinnia took his hand, grounding him. Breathe, she said. I need you to be strong for me. Frank nodded, forcing himself to focus. He helped Zinnia to the chair they had prepared, then rode hell for leather to fetch Rosa Martinez, who had experience with birthing and had agreed to help. By the time he returned with Rosa, dawn was breaking and Zinnia's contractions were coming faster. Rosa took charge with the competence of experience, directing Frank to boil water and prepare cloths. Then she shooed him out of the room, saying he would just be in the way. Frank paced the main room like a caged animal, flinching at every sound from the bedroom, every cry from Zinnia. The hours crawled by. Frank prayed, something he had not done in years, bargaining with a God he was not sure he believed in anymore. Please let them be okay. Please let them both live. I will do anything, be anything, just please let them be okay. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he heard it. The thin, wailing cry of a baby. Frank's knees went weak with relief. A moment later, Rosa appeared in the doorway, beaming. You have a son, she announced. A big, healthy boy, and Zinnia is fine, tired but fine. Come meet your son, Frank. Frank walked into the bedroom on shaking legs. Zinnia was propped up in bed, exhausted and pale but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. Frank approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Come see, Zinnia said softly. Come see your son. Frank looked down at the baby and felt his entire world shift. The baby was perfect, tiny and red-faced and squalling with impressive volume. He had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were dark like zinnias. "Can I hold him?" Frank asked, his voice cracking. Zinnia carefully transferred the baby into Frank's arms. The weight of his son, the reality of this new life, was overwhelming. Frank looked down at the baby, and tears streamed down his face for the second time since Zinnia had come into his life. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello, little one. I am your father. I am going to take care of you and love you and do everything I can to give you a good life. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The baby blinked up at him, and Frank could have sworn he saw recognition in those dark eyes, some primal knowledge that this was his father, his protector. "What should we name him?" Zinnia asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not been able to agree. Now, looking at his son, Frank knew. "Thomas," he said, "after my brother. Thomas Martinez Navarro, if you agree. Martinez for Rosa and Samuel for their kindness to us." Zinnia smiled. "Thomas Martinez Navarro, it is a good name, a strong name." Rosa, who had been discreetly cleaning up in the corner, wiped her eyes. "You honor us," she said. "Samuel will be so pleased." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and alert. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, for which both Frank and Zinnia were grateful. Frank found himself besotted with his son, constantly checking on him, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, the way he would grip Frank's finger with surprising strength. Zinnia blossomed as a mother. She was patient and loving, singing Thomas the same songs she had sung while pregnant, teaching him about the world even though he was far too young to understand. Frank would often find them together, Zinnia murmuring to Thomas in her own language, telling him stories of his ancestors, making sure he knew where he came from. As Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch prospered. With the rustler problem resolved and Frank's hard work paying off, they were able to expand their herd, hire a couple of hands to help with the work. Money was still tight, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their son and even save a little. Thomas was a happy child, quick to laugh and full of curiosity. He had his mother's dark eyes and hair, but his father's stubborn jaw and determination. By the time he was 3, he was following Frank around the ranch, trying to help with chores, chattering endlessly in a mix of English and the Mescalero words Zinnia taught him. In 1882, Zinnia told Frank she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with joy but less anxiety. They knew what to expect now, and Zinnia's first pregnancy had gone so well that Frank felt more confident this time. Their second child, a daughter they named Lily Rosa Navarro, was born in early 1883. She had Frank's lighter coloring and Zinnia's delicate features, and she was louder than Thomas had ever been, making her displeasure known with impressive volume whenever she was hungry or tired or simply wanted attention. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help take care of her. Frank and Zinnia took turns getting up with Lily at night, both of them exhausted but happy, their family feeling complete. The years rolled on, full of hard work and simple joys. They celebrated holidays, Thomas's and Lily's birthdays, their wedding anniversary each August. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, all the challenges that came with ranching life. But they weathered them together, Frank and Zinnia a united team, their love for each other and their children the foundation everything else was built on. Thomas grew into a capable young man, taking on more responsibility on the ranch. He was good with animals like his mother and had his father's work ethic. Lily was spirited and clever, equally at home helping her mother in the house or riding out with her father to check the herds. Both children grew up knowing they were loved, knowing they came from two cultures and could be proud of both. There were still difficulties, of course. Some people in town never fully accepted Zinnia, never stopped seeing her as an Apache first and a person second. Thomas and Lily both faced teasing and worse from other children because of their mixed heritage. But Frank and Zinnia taught them to be proud of who they were, to stand tall in the face of prejudice. And slowly, grudgingly, even the most hostile townspeople came to respect the Navarro family for their hard work and integrity. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Frank and Zinnia sat on the porch as the sun set, watching Thomas and Lily play in the yard. Thomas was 14 now, already taller than his mother and shooting up toward his father's height. Lily was 5, all energy and mischief. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Frank said, his hand clasped with Zinnia's. "Some days it feels like just yesterday," Zinnia said. "Other days it feels like we have always been together." "I cannot imagine my life without you," Frank said. "You saved me, Zinnia. When you came here, I was barely alive, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me love and a family and a purpose. Everything good in my life comes from you." Zinnia squeezed his hand. "We saved each other," she said. "I was a ghost, Frank, barely existing. You saw me when no one else did. You treated me with respect and kindness when I had forgotten what that felt like. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to hope again. We saved each other, and then we built this life together." Frank raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Here is to the next 10 years," he said. "And the 10 after that, and every year until we are old and gray and watching our grandchildren play in this yard. I will look forward to every single one," Zinnia said, her eyes shining with love, and they did have those years and many more besides. They grew old together, weathering the changes the new century brought, watching their children grow up and start families of their own. Thomas married a woman from town, a teacher named Caroline, and they gave Frank and Zinnia 3 grandchildren. Lily married a man from the Mescalero reservation, a skilled horse trainer named Joseph, honoring both sides of her heritage, and they had 2 children. The ranch passed to Thomas when Frank and Zinnia grew too old to manage it themselves, though they stayed in the house, helping where they could, doting on their grandchildren. Frank's hair went white, and his back developed a permanent stoop from years of hard labor, but his eyes still lit up whenever Zinnia walked into a room. Zinnia's face developed deep wrinkles, maps of a life fully lived, but her voice remained strong, and she still sang those haunting songs that had first made Frank weep all those years ago. On a warm evening in 1910, 32 years after they had first met, Frank and Zinnia sat together on the porch as the sun set. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and spirit. Their grandchildren were visiting, running around the yard with shouts of laughter, and the sound filled Frank with contentment. "I have had a good life," he said to Zinnia, "better than I ever dreamed possible." "So have I," Zinnia said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and Frank wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "I am grateful for every moment of it." "I love you," Frank said. "I have loved you since the moment I heard you sing. I will love you until I take my last breath, and if there is anything beyond that, I will love you there too." "I love you too," Zinnia said, "always and forever." They sat together in the gathering darkness, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family and a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The stars came out one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding all those years ago, and Frank felt at peace. Whatever happened next, whatever the future held, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had been blessed beyond measure. He had known true love. He had been given a family. He had lived a life that mattered. And it had all started with a lonely rancher who hired a quiet native woman, and one evening when she sang a song that made him weep, cracking open his heart and letting the light back in. Years continued to pass gently for Frank and Zinnia. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1918, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The world had changed dramatically around them. The old frontier had been tamed. New Mexico had become a state. Automobiles had started appearing on the roads, but their love remained constant, a steady anchor in changing times. Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1921, at the age of 75. Zinnia held his hand as he took his last breath, singing softly to him the same song she had sung all those years ago, the song about finding your way home. She told him she loved him, told him to wait for her on the other side, that she would find him again. Zinnia lived another 3 years, cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days working in her garden, teaching her grandchildren the old songs and stories, making sure the Mescalero part of their heritage was not forgotten. She spoke often of Frank, sharing stories of their life together, making sure everyone knew how much they had loved each other. She passed away in 1924 at the age of 69, surrounded by family. Her last words were, "I am coming, Frank. Wait for me." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. The headstones bore simple inscriptions: Frank Navarro, 1846-1921. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he found love when he thought all was lost. Zinnia Jackson Navarro, 1855-1924. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she sang him home. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from Thomas to his children and grandchildren. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, some family members swore they could hear singing, a woman's voice carrying the haunting melody of a song about finding your way home, and underneath it, a man's voice, rough but warm, singing along. The love story of Frank and Zinnia became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about loneliness and connection, about seeing another person truly and being seen in return, about two broken people who found each other and built something beautiful together. It was a story about how a single moment of vulnerability, a single song shared in the twilight, could change everything. It was a story about coming home to each other, and through each other, coming home to themselves. And it was a story about love, the kind of love that endures beyond hardship, beyond prejudice, beyond time itself. The kind of love that leaves a mark on the world, ripples spreading outward through children and grandchildren, through the land itself, through the very air of a place where two souls found each other and said, "Here, this is where I belong." That love lived on in the Navarro family, in the way they treated each other with respect and kindness, in the way they honored both sides of their heritage, in the songs still sung around dinner tables and campfires. It lived on in the ranch that Frank built and Zinnia helped sustain, in every fence post and water trough, every horse and cow, every blade of grass. It lived on in the stories told on warm summer evenings when the grandchildren would gather and say, "Tell us again about great-grandpa Frank and great-grandma Zinnia. Tell us how they fell in love." And the story would be told again, kept alive through the generations, a testament to what could be built when two people chose to see past difference and pain, when they chose connection over isolation, hope over despair, love over fear. Frank had been a lonely rancher who thought his life would be nothing but work and silence until his death. Zinnia had been a woman adrift, having lost everything, certain she would never belong anywhere again. But they found each other on a ranch in New Mexico Territory in 1878, and they built a life together that neither could have imagined. They raised children who grew strong and proud. They created a home filled with love and laughter. They faced every challenge side by side, their partnership unshakable. And it all began because Frank took a chance on hiring a quiet native woman, and one evening she sang a song that made him weep. And in his tears, she saw his humanity, and in her song he heard her soul, and they recognized each other for what they truly were. Two halves of a whole, finally complete. The ranch stood for generations after their deaths, a testament to what they built together. The cottonwood tree on the hill grew tall and strong, its branches providing shade for the graves of Frank and Zinnia, its roots intertwining deep in the earth, inseparable, eternal. And on certain nights when the moon was full and the air was still, if you stood on that hill and listened very carefully, you might hear it. A woman singing, her voice pure and haunting, and beneath it, the sound of a man weeping, not from sorrow but from joy, from the overwhelming gratitude of a soul who found love when he thought all hope was lost. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and parting. But it also never ended, living on in memory, in legacy, in the very land they loved and tended together. It was a story without true conclusion, because love like theirs does not end. It transforms. It endures. It becomes part of the fabric of the world. Frank and Zinnia Navarro loved each other for 43 years in this life, and their descendants believed they continued to love each other wherever they were now. Their story was complete, their ending happy, not because everything was perfect, but because they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. And so the story of the lonely rancher and the quiet native woman came to its close, a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Wild West, a testament to the power of human connection, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of love. It was a story that proved that even in the darkest times, even when all seems lost, love can find a way. Hope can survive. Two broken people can become whole together. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, celebrated, and passed down through the generations as an example of what we can be at our best: compassionate, courageous, and capable of loving across any divide. The story of Frank and Zinnia Navarro was complete, their journey together finished, their love eternal. And in the end, that was all that mattered.